The room was alive with laughter, loud and cruel, echoing against the classroom walls like sharp needles. Marcus stood at the front of the room, chalk in hand, his eyes staring at the half-erased problem on the board. His small frame seemed to shrink under the weight of the attention. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple as he tried to read the question out loud, but his words stumbled, his voice breaking in between syllables. Some students in the back slapped their desks, doubling over with laughter. One boy shouted, "Come on, slow coach," and the others followed with a chorus of mocking giggles. Even the teacher, Mr. Harlan, could not hide his frustration. He pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaled loudly, and said in a tired tone, "Marcus, it's a simple multiplication question. We learned this weeks ago. Everyone else has managed. Why can't you?" The words hit Marcus harder than the laughter. The teacher's disappointment felt heavier than all the cruel voices combined. But what no one in that room knew was that Marcus's mind worked in ways they could not understand. What looked like slowness to them was actually Marcus's struggle to fit his strange way of thinking into their narrow mold. At home, he scribbled strange equations on scraps of paper. At the library, he stared for hours at thick books filled with symbols most adults ignored. His mind was not slow, it was racing in a direction no one around him could follow. But in this moment, standing in front of the board, all anyone saw was a boy who couldn't answer. The laughter grew louder, bouncing off the walls. Some students tapped their pencils on their desks like drums, adding rhythm to the humiliation. Marcus lowered his eyes, wishing for the ground to open and swallow him whole. His hands trembled as he held the chalk. He wanted to drop it and run back to his desk. He wanted to disappear into the corner of the room where no one could see him. But then something unexpected happened. Mr. Harlan, perhaps tired of the noise, turned back to the board and began writing. His movements were sharp and fast, chalk scratching the surface in a blur. When he stepped aside, the class fell quiet, not out of respect but out of surprise. The board was filled with numbers, fractions, exponents, and long chains of symbols. It was not a question from their textbook. It looked alien, almost like something pulled from a college exam. Mr. Harlan turned, his eyes sweeping the class, and he said in a challenging voice, "This problem here, none of you can solve it. It's unsolvable for your age group. In fact, I doubt any of you will even understand what it's asking." The students shifted in their seats, confused. Some tried to copy the question into their notebooks, but their pens froze midway. It looked too complicated, too far beyond anything they had learned. A few laughed nervously, as if the difficulty of the problem excused their lack of effort. The teacher smirked, almost proud of the silence, as though he had proven his point that none of them could rise to the challenge. "See," he said. "This is what real math looks like. This is why I push you. To show you how little you know." He looked around, almost daring anyone to try. No hands went up. No one even pretended to attempt it. Except Marcus. Marcus's eyes locked on the problem. At first, his vision blurred. The symbols looked messy, overwhelming. His heart pounded in his chest. His fingers, still clutching the chalk, trembled harder. Behind him, whispers started again. "He's going to try," one voice said. Another laughed. "Slow Marcus doesn't even know his times tables. He's going to solve that." The laughter rose again, crueler now, fueled by the absurdity of the thought. But Marcus barely heard them. Something inside his head had started to shift. The problem on the board was not just a mess of numbers, it was a puzzle. And puzzles were the only thing that ever made him feel alive. His mind, which had always moved slower when asked to recite simple answers, suddenly felt awake, sharp, like gears turning smoothly after being stuck. He saw patterns. He saw hidden connections between the numbers. It was as though the symbols whispered to him in a language only he could understand. His chest rose and fell quickly. He did not know if he had the courage to move, but he felt something strange, a pull, a need to at least try. For once, he did not care about the laughter. He did not even care about the teacher's disappointed sighs. All he cared about was the board, glowing before his eyes like a challenge meant only for him. Marcus lifted the chalk. The room quieted for a moment, then exploded again with laughter. "Look at him," someone shouted. He thinks he can do it. Another student cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, "Slow Marcus saves the day." The teacher made no effort to stop the mockery. He simply crossed his arms and leaned against the desk, watching with an expression of tired curiosity, as if to say, "Go ahead. Let's see you fail." Marcus ignored it all. He placed the chalk against the board, his hand shaking. His mind was racing so fast he could hardly breathe. He did not know if he could finish. He did not know if what he saw in his head would even make sense when written out. But one thing was certain, he felt alive in this moment, more alive than he ever had before. The voices behind him grew louder, sharper, pressing against him like a storm. But inside his chest, a fire had been lit. And while no one else in the room could see it, Marcus knew something none of them could imagine. This was not the moment he would break. This was the moment something inside him was unlocking. And once it unlocked, nothing would ever be the same. The night after the classroom humiliation, Marcus sat in the corner of his small bedroom. The dim light from a single lamp lit the space, casting long shadows on the peeling walls. His desk was cluttered with scraps of paper, old homework sheets, torn notebooks, even napkins covered with numbers and symbols. To anyone else, it looked like a mess. But to Marcus, each page carried a piece of a puzzle he was trying to solve. His mother, Denise, walked in quietly. She was tired, her face lined from long hours at the diner where she worked 2 shifts back-to-back. She placed a plate of food beside him, just rice and beans, the cheapest meal they could afford that week. "Eat, baby," she said softly. "You need your strength." Marcus looked up, gave her a faint smile, and nodded. But the moment she left the room, he pushed the plate aside and leaned back over his papers. He could not let go of the problem the teacher had written on the board earlier that day. The equation had burned itself into his mind like a mark. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it, taunting him, daring him. His classmates' laughter still rang in his ears, but instead of breaking him, it pushed him deeper into the numbers. He wanted to prove, if only to himself, that he was not what they called him. Marcus picked up a pencil stub, worn down almost to nothing, and began scribbling again. The pencil scratched across the paper in quick strokes. He muttered numbers under his breath, sometimes erasing entire lines, sometimes filling margins with arrows and notes. Hours passed without him noticing. Outside, the city grew quiet, the streetlights flickering in the night. It wasn't the first time Marcus had done this. For months, maybe years, he had been secretly obsessed with math. Not the kind taught in class, where the teacher demanded quick answers to multiplication tables, but math that stretched his mind, math that felt like solving riddles from another world. When he was 9, he had found an old algebra book thrown out near the library trash bin. The pages were worn, the cover torn, but he carried it home like treasure. That book had been his real teacher ever since. At the library, he snuck into sections meant for older students. Sometimes librarians frowned, but when they saw how focused he was, they left him alone. He read books filled with strange symbols and patterns. He didn't understand all of it, but he refused to stop. Bit by bit, he taught himself. To Marcus, numbers weren't just numbers, they were alive, like pieces of music forming hidden songs. But in school, his gift only betrayed him. When asked to solve basic problems quickly, he froze. His brain wanted to explore, to see the patterns, not just spit out an answer. The delay made him look slow. His classmates mocked him. Even teachers assumed he wasn't trying hard enough. Marcus never argued back. He swallowed their words, saving his energy for the numbers that made sense to him. That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked at the chaotic stack of papers around him. He felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of fear and excitement. The problem from class, he was closer to solving it than he had ever been to solving anything before. He whispered to himself, "I can do this. I can." In the other room, Denise prayed quietly. She worried about Marcus. Teachers often called her, saying her son was distracted, behind, not keeping up. Some suggested she consider special help. Denise always nodded politely, but inside, she felt a stubborn fire. She had seen Marcus's notebooks, the strange numbers covering them. She didn't understand any of it, but she knew one thing, her boy was different. And different, to her, wasn't bad. It was special. The next morning, Marcus carried his crumpled papers to school, tucked carefully inside his backpack. He wanted to show the teacher that he had solved the problem. Maybe then the laughter would stop. Maybe then someone would finally see him for who he was. But when he arrived, the day unfolded the same as always. The students snickered, called him slow, whispered jokes when he walked past. Marcus kept his head low. When the teacher entered, Marcus tried to raise his hand, but the chaos of the classroom drowned him out. He pressed the papers closer to his chest, deciding to wait. That afternoon, the announcement came. The school had been chosen to send students to a regional math event. The top kids from each school would compete. The classroom erupted in chatter, everyone wanted to know who would be picked. Names of the brightest students bounced around. Marcus's name wasn't mentioned once. But something unexpected happened. The teacher, perhaps out of pity or a cruel sense of humor, looked straight at him and said, "Marcus, maybe you'd like to try." The class burst into laughter so loud it shook the room. Some kids banged their desks. One girl shouted, "Let him. It'll be funny." Marcus's heart pounded. For a moment, he almost shook his head, almost let the humiliation pass. But then he thought about the long nights at his desk, the hours in the library, the numbers that whispered to him when everyone else slept. Slowly, he nodded. The laughter grew louder, but Marcus didn't care. He knew something they didn't. He knew he had a gift hidden inside him, a gift even he was only beginning to understand. And deep down, he felt it, this competition could be the moment the world finally saw it too. The day of the big announcement spread quickly through the school. Posters were placed on walls, telling everyone about the regional math championship. It was going to be held in the city gymnasium, where students from different schools would gather to face problems harder than anything in their textbooks. To most kids, it sounded like torture. To Marcus, it sounded like destiny. But not everyone saw it that way. In the cafeteria, Marcus sat alone with his lunch tray. The noise of the room buzzed around him, kids laughing, talking, trading snacks. He opened his milk carton and tried not to listen, but his ears caught the whispers anyway. "Did you hear? Marcus signed up for the math competition." A burst of laughter followed. "Slow Marcus. Competing in math. He'll be lucky if he can count his fingers right." Another voice chimed in, "I hope they film it. Watching him fail will be the best comedy show ever." Marcus looked down at his food, untouched. His hands tightened into fists, but he didn't speak. He had learned long ago that words never helped. The only answer he had was the one he could give on paper, through numbers, not noise. When he got home, Denise noticed the quiet storm in his eyes. She placed her hand gently on his shoulder and asked, "Baby, what's going on?" Marcus hesitated, then told her about the competition. He expected her to say what everyone else did, that it was too hard, that he shouldn't embarrass himself. But instead, she smiled softly. "You've been working at this for years without anyone knowing. Maybe now it's time they see what I already see in you." Her words gave Marcus strength. That night, instead of feeling fear, he felt focus. He sharpened his only pencil until it was half its size and began working late into the night. He practiced problems from books far beyond his grade level. He studied quietly, methodically, until his eyes burned. He wasn't preparing to prove his classmates wrong anymore. He was preparing to prove himself right. The morning of the event came faster than he expected. Marcus stood in front of the school bus that would take the competitors to the city. The other chosen students, confident, well-dressed, already bragging about their chances, stood in small groups. Marcus stood alone, clutching his backpack tightly. A few of them glanced at him with smirks, whispering just loud enough for him to hear. The bus ride was filled with chatter and laughter, but Marcus sat silently by the window, watching the city buildings rush past. His stomach churned with nervous energy. He pressed his hand against his chest and whispered to himself, "You've solved harder problems. You can do this. Don't let them see your fear." When they arrived, the city gym was already crowded. Rows of chairs were filled with parents, teachers, and local reporters with cameras flashing. A large stage was set up at the front, with long tables covered in paper, pencils, and water bottles for the competitors. A giant screen stood behind the stage, ready to project the questions. Marcus's heart raced as he walked to his assigned seat. The stage lights felt hot on his skin, and the murmurs of the crowd pressed against him like a heavy weight. He could feel eyes on him, his classmates, strangers, maybe even reporters who already knew the slow kid was here to fail. The announcer's voice boomed across the gym. "Welcome, everyone, to the Regional Math Championship. Today, these bright students will face problems designed to test the limits of their ability. Some questions are ones even adults struggle with. Only the best will make it to the final round." Marcus swallowed hard. Around him, the other competitors sat tall and proud, pencils already in hand. He sat lower in his chair, trying to calm the storm in his chest. The first round began. Problems appeared on the screen, long word problems, fractions stacked on fractions, equations twisted in confusing ways. Marcus gripped his pencil. At first, his hand shook, but then something strange happened. As his eyes scanned the numbers, the noise of the gym faded. He no longer heard the whispers, the laughter, the clicking of cameras. All he saw was the puzzle. He began to write. Slowly at first, then faster, his pencil moving like it had a life of its own. Where others scribbled and erased in frustration, Marcus's pages began filling with steady, clear steps. For the first time in his life, he felt at home in public, because here, numbers mattered more than words. But even as he worked, he could feel the eyes on him. The audience whispered. Some pointed. "Isn't that the boy everyone said was slow?" a parent asked another. The doubt swirled around the room like smoke. When the buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the round, Marcus dropped his pencil. His paper was covered from corner to corner with calculations. He glanced around. Many competitors had given up halfway, their papers nearly empty. Others had smudged erasures all over the page. Marcus's heart pounded harder. The judges collected the sheets, their expressions unreadable. Minutes later, the results appeared on the screen. The names of the students moving to the next round scrolled one by one. And there it was. Marcus Carter, qualified. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some clapped politely. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Marcus's classmates in the audience fell silent for the first time. He had made it. Against every whisper, against every laugh, he was still standing. But this was only the beginning. The next round promised something far more difficult. The announcer's voice boomed again. The next problem is one that has challenged even professional mathematicians. Let's see who dares to try. Marcus gripped his pencil tighter, his palms sweaty. He looked at the board as the problem appeared on the giant screen. The room filled with gasps. The equation looked impossible. But to Marcus, it looked like a door. A door waiting to be unlocked. The gym was so silent that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. The giant screen glowed at the front, showing the new problem. To the crowd, it looked like a tangled mess of numbers, symbols, and equations stacked one after another. A boy sitting 2 seats away muttered under his breath, "This is insane. They can't expect us to solve this." Another competitor raised his hand timidly and asked the judge, "Sir, is this even possible?" The judge only smiled, giving no answer. The announcer's voice filled the air again. "This problem has been attempted by university students, and even then, most gave up. Whoever solves this today will not only win this round, they will make history." The words made the crowd gasp. Parents shook their heads. Teachers leaned forward. Even the reporters, who had been casually taking pictures, now held their cameras ready, eager to capture whatever came next. Marcus stared at the board. His palms were sweaty, his pencil slippery between his fingers. His eyes darted across the problem, his chest rising and falling faster. For a moment, it felt like too much. The whispers behind him echoed in his mind. Slow boy, too dumb to solve simple math. The laughter he had lived with all his life seemed to press against his skull. He almost froze. Almost gave in. But then, deep inside, something shifted. The numbers on the board weren't mocking him. They weren't his enemy. They were a challenge, like a locked door waiting for the right key. And Marcus had been finding keys his whole life. He straightened in his chair, gripped his pencil, and whispered to himself, "Focus. Just focus." Around him, the other competitors scribbled furiously, their faces tense. Some erased and rewrote, others dropped their pencils in frustration. One boy groaned and pushed his paper away. Marcus, however, did not rush. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, then opened them again. When he looked at the equation, it was no longer chaos. He began to see patterns, hidden shapes within the numbers, like a secret rhythm in music. Slowly, carefully, Marcus wrote his first line. Then another. His pencil moved steadily, as if his hand had finally found its rhythm. Each step he wrote seemed to unlock the next, like following a trail of clues only he could see. The crowd, noticing his calm focus, began to shift uncomfortably. At first, they had dismissed him. But now, their eyes stayed glued to his paper, curious, unsure. One parent whispered, "That's the boy they said was slow? Look at him." Another replied, "No, look at his work. He's not guessing. He knows what he's doing." Minutes passed. The stage grew tense. Competitors groaned, scratched their heads, some even put their heads down on the desk in defeat. But Marcus kept going, line after line, his page filling with numbers, each more complex than the last. His face was calm now, almost peaceful, like he was in his own world. And in truth, he was. The noise of the gym faded away. The whispers, the laughter, the doubts, gone. All that remained was Marcus and the puzzle. His pencil danced across the paper, his mind alive with clarity. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only 20 minutes, Marcus dropped his pencil. His hand trembled, but not with fear, with relief. He stared at the final line of his solution, his chest heavy with breath. He had done it. He had found the answer. The room was dead silent. People leaned forward, trying to see his paper. The judges, sitting at the front, exchanged quick glances. One of them stood and walked to Marcus's desk. He picked up the paper, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. The other judges joined him, huddled around the sheet like archaeologists discovering treasure. The crowd waited, holding their breath. A few students in the audience snickered, convinced Marcus had gotten it wrong. But then, the judges froze. Their faces shifted from curiosity to disbelief. One of them mouthed the word, "Impossible." Another whispered, "He solved it." Gasps spread through the gym. People sat up straighter, murmuring in shock. Reporters clicked their cameras rapidly. Students who had once mocked Marcus now stared, their mouths open. His classmates in the audience exchanged uneasy looks, their laughter silenced. The announcer's voice broke through the noise, trembling with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this young man has done what no one expected. He has solved the problem." The gym erupted. Applause thundered across the room, echoing against the walls. Parents stood to their feet, clapping wildly. Teachers shook their heads in awe. Even some of the competitors clapped reluctantly, their earlier confidence shattered. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, unsure how to react. His face burned, not with shame this time, but with something new, pride. For the first time in his life, the world wasn't laughing at him. They were cheering for him. His teacher, Mr. Harlan, sat in the audience, stunned. He had once sighed in frustration at Marcus's slowness, never realizing what was hidden behind those quiet eyes. Now, he stared at the boy in disbelief, as if seeing him for the very first time. But Marcus didn't look at his teacher. He didn't look at his classmates. He didn't even look at the judges. Instead, he looked down at his trembling hands, whispering to himself, "I knew it. I knew I wasn't slow." The announcer called Marcus to the front of the stage. Slowly, he stood, his legs weak but his heart stronger than ever. As he walked, the crowd clapped louder, cameras flashing in bursts of light. He stood in the spotlight, no longer the boy who was laughed at, he was the boy who solved the unsolvable. And yet, Marcus knew this was not the end. This was only the beginning. The sound of applause still rang through the gymnasium as Marcus stood in the spotlight. His heart was pounding, but his face remained calm. For years, he had been the boy others called slow, the one who tripped over simple problems. But now, in this moment, he stood taller than ever, not because he wanted to humiliate anyone, but because he had finally proven the truth to himself and to everyone watching. In the audience, the classmates who had laughed at him sat frozen. Some had been whispering jokes earlier, waiting for Marcus to embarrass himself. Now, their laughter was gone. Their faces were pale, their mouths open, as if they were seeing a ghost. A boy in the back, the loudest one who had mocked Marcus in school, leaned forward with wide eyes. He whispered to his friend, "He actually solved it, he really did." But the words had no energy, no humor. They were filled with disbelief. The judges called Marcus's name again, and he stepped forward, holding his paper in trembling hands. One of the judges, a woman with silver glasses, smiled kindly at him. "Young man, do you understand what you've done here?" she asked, her voice shaking with excitement. "This problem has stumped older students. Some of our own colleagues struggled with it. And yet, you solved it with clarity, step by step. This is not luck. This is brilliance." The crowd erupted once more. Teachers and parents clapped louder, some even standing. Reporters rushed to the stage, their cameras flashing non-stop. The announcer raised his voice over the noise, declaring, "For the first time in this championship's history, a middle school student has solved one of the hardest problems alive." Marcus blinked at the words. The hardest problem alive. His chest tightened. He thought back to the nights at his small desk, the worn-out pencil, the quiet library corners, the torn pages of old books. He thought about the laughter in his classroom, the whispers in the hall, the look on his teacher's face when he stumbled over multiplication tables. All those memories seemed so far away now, fading under the bright lights of this stage. In the audience, his teacher, Mr. Harlan, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had been the one to sigh, the one to believe Marcus wasn't capable. Now, watching his student stand victorious, he felt a strange mixture of shame and pride. He clapped slowly at first, then louder, though his eyes never left Marcus's face. For the first time, he wondered how many other slow students were simply misunderstood. Back on stage, Marcus stood in silence as the applause rolled like thunder. He wasn't smiling widely. His expression was soft, almost fragile. He didn't see this as revenge. He didn't want his classmates to feel small. He only wanted them to understand different did not mean broken. The announcer turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, let this be a lesson. Never judge too quickly. Sometimes, the quietest minds are the brightest of all." The crowd clapped again, louder than before. Parents whispered to their children, telling them to remember this moment. Teachers exchanged looks, realizing how wrong first impressions could be. Then came the moment that silenced the gym completely. The announcer invited Marcus to explain his solution to the audience. For a second, panic returned. Marcus had always struggled to speak in front of others. His throat felt dry, his hands shook. The room of faces staring at him looked like a mountain he could never climb. But then, he thought of his mother. He pictured her tired smile, her faith in him. He thought of all the nights she had let him stay up, watching him scribble numbers while she whispered prayers in the kitchen. He knew he had to try. Marcus stepped to the board. He picked up the chalk again, his hand trembling. He turned toward the crowd, his voice quiet at first. I didn't see this as one big problem. I broke it down into smaller ones. Like puzzles. And when I solved each puzzle, they connected, like pieces of a picture. The judges leaned forward, nodding. The crowd listened carefully, silent and respectful now. Marcus's voice grew steadier as he continued. He explained the steps, not with arrogance, but with the gentleness of someone who wanted to share, not boast. And slowly, the audience understood. Even those who didn't know math could see the beauty in how his mind worked. When he finished, the room erupted again in applause. This time, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Not wide, not proud, just a quiet, honest smile that reached his eyes. In the back row, his classmates who once mocked him sat in stunned silence. No one laughed. No one dared to whisper. For the first time, they felt the weight of their words, the cruelty of their jokes. And for the first time, they saw Marcus not as slow, but as something they could never claim to be brilliant. As Marcus stepped down from the stage, reporters rushed toward him, asking questions. One of them asked, "Marcus, how does it feel to prove everyone wrong?" Marcus stopped, thought for a moment, then shook his head softly. "I didn't do this to prove anyone wrong," he said. "I did this to prove that I was right about myself." Those words hit harder than the solution itself. The room went quiet for a moment, before another wave of applause broke out, louder than ever. Marcus returned to his seat, clutching his pencil tightly. He knew something had changed forever. The boy they laughed at was gone. The boy they underestimated had risen. And while he wasn't seeking revenge, he knew one truth: the laughter would never sound the same again. It had turned to silence. The crowd in the auditorium was frozen in silence. Moments ago, Marcus had written the impossible equation on the board, and the answer glowed with perfect logic. Professors whispered among themselves. Students stared wide-eyed. "Impossible," one of the older professors muttered. "He solved it, like it was nothing." But Marcus wasn't celebrating. His hands were shaking, his chest rising and falling quickly. He looked out at the sea of faces, unsure whether they would mock him again or finally see him for who he was. Then the lead professor, Dr. Reynolds, stepped forward. His glasses gleamed under the lights. "Marcus," he said slowly, his voice serious, "do you know what you just did?" Marcus looked down at the chalkboard, then back at him. "I just solved the problem," he said softly. Dr. Reynolds shook his head. "No. You didn't just solve a problem. You cracked a question that top scientists have debated for years. You may have changed the way we see numbers themselves." The entire hall gasped. Some clapped nervously, others whispered in disbelief. But before Marcus could react, another professor stood. Her face was strict, her tone sharp. "Hold on. This could be a trick. A memorized answer, perhaps. We need to test him further." The hall went silent again. The woman's words cut the air like a blade. Dr. Reynolds hesitated, then nodded. "You're right. Marcus, will you take another test? A test with no preparation, no chance to cheat. A test of pure thought." Marcus's throat went dry. His eyes darted to the crowd. His old classmates were in the front rows, still staring at him in disbelief. Some whispered insults under their breath, hoping he would fail. This was his moment. He couldn't back down now. "Yes," Marcus said firmly, his voice clear. "I'll take the test." The professors gathered, whispering among themselves. They finally handed him a new sheet of paper with another problem. This time, it wasn't just numbers. It was a mix of logic, symbols, and patterns, something even PhD students would struggle with. The entire room leaned forward, waiting. Marcus sat down at the desk, the paper in front of him. He gripped the pencil tightly. For a moment, his mind went blank. The voices in his head began to return. "You're slow. You're worthless. You'll never be good enough." He closed his eyes. He remembered the years of sitting alone, solving puzzles no one gave him. He remembered the quiet nights, whispering numbers to himself under the glow of a broken lamp. He remembered the teacher's sigh, the laughter of his classmates, the pain of being invisible. And then he remembered his mother's words, "Your gift will shine one day, Marcus. Don't let the world dim it." His heart steadied. His breathing slowed. He opened his eyes and looked at the problem again. Something clicked. To everyone else, the symbols were chaos. To Marcus, they became a rhythm, like music in his head. Numbers danced, shapes twisted into patterns, and hidden solutions began to appear. He scribbled quickly, faster than before, his hand flying across the paper as though the answers were already waiting for him. The professors leaned in closer. Dr. Reynolds gripped the edge of the table, his eyes unblinking. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Sweat rolled down Marcus's forehead. The room was so silent that every scratch of his pencil echoed through the hall. Finally, he stopped. He dropped the pencil and pushed the paper forward. His hands trembled, but his eyes were calm. The professors grabbed the paper and studied it. The strict woman who had doubted him earlier read it line by line. Her face slowly changed from skepticism to shock. She placed the paper down and whispered, "It's correct, every single step. The room erupted. Gasps, cheers, and applause filled the hall. Even those who had doubted him were now on their feet. Dr. Reynolds walked to Marcus and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, do you realize what you've proven today? You're not just smart, you may be one of the greatest minds of your generation." Marcus's classmates sat frozen in the front row. The same kids who had called him slow now looked small and powerless. One boy muttered under his breath, How did he do that?" Marcus looked at them, not with anger but with calm. For the first time, he didn't feel small. He felt powerful not because of applause, not because of praise, but because he had faced the fire and walked through it. Dr. Reynolds turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed history. A boy once mocked for being slow has done what many of us believed impossible. Today, Marcus reminded us all, greatness often comes from where we least expect it." The applause grew louder, echoing through the building. Reporters rushed forward, snapping photos. Teachers who had once doubted him now clapped with teary eyes. Marcus, however, stood quietly. His eyes glistened, his lips curved in a small smile. He wasn't thinking about the cheers. He was thinking about the boy who once sat alone, whispering numbers in the dark. That boy had finally been heard. But deep inside, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The test was over, but a greater challenge was coming. The world would not just clap, they would question, test, and even try to break him. And Marcus was ready. Because once the fire had tested him, he discovered something powerful inside. Something no laughter, no insult, no doubt could ever take away. He had found his gift. And now, the world had seen it too.